In the hushed, rarefied air of Manhattan's most exclusive private dining room, a single stroke of a pen was about to change the world for 50,000 people. Billionaire industrialist Arthur Sterling, a legend of American business, was about to sign away his entire life's work. The deal worth $11 billion was done. His lawyers from Sullivan and Cromwell had approved it. His bankers from Goldman Sachs had celebrated it. But as his Mont Blanc pen hovered over the signature line, a voice soft as a sigh cut through the silence. A young waitress, risking everything, leaned in and whispered a warning that would ignite a firestorm. "Don't sign this." What could she possibly know that his army of experts had missed? The answer would not only save his company, it would expose a conspiracy of breathtaking greed. The Pinnacle Room was less a room and more a declaration of power. Perched 62 floors above Columbus Circle, its floor-to-ceiling windows presented a god's-eye view of Central Park. A sprawling green carpet laid out for the titans of industry who dined within its soundproofed walls. The air itself seemed expensive, a carefully curated blend of aged leather freesia and the faint metallic scent of ambition. At the head of the massive obsidian table sat Arthur Sterling. At 72, he looked every bit the patriarch of a bygone era. His silver hair was impeccably parted, his suit a bespoke creation from Savile Row that cost more than the car most people drove. But his eyes, a pale and weary blue, told a different story. They held the weight of a 50-year career, spent forging an empire, Sterling Industries, from a single machine shop in Ohio into a global manufacturing powerhouse. And they held the deeper, more personal weight of loss. It had been 2 years since his wife, Martha, had passed, and the silence in his life had been deafening ever since. Selling the company had felt less like a choice and more like a surrender. His children had their own lives, their own passions, far from the grit of foundries and factories. He was tired. The endless quarterly reports, the relentless pressure to innovate, the constant battles with regulators and rivals, it was a young man's game. Across the table, Damien Stryker smiled, a flash of perfectly white teeth in a tanned, handsome face. Stryker was the CEO of Vanguard Equity Partners, the private equity firm acquiring Sterling Industries. He was everything Arthur was not: young, slick, and utterly unsentimental. He spoke in a language of synergies, leveraging, and shareholder value that felt alien to Arthur, who still knew the names of the men who had worked on his factory floor for over 40 years. A historic day, Arthur Stryker said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. He gestured to the 2-inch thick document in the center of the table. "A testament to your life's work. We are honored to be its custodians." Arthur gave a non-committal grunt. He didn't like Stryker. The man's charisma felt manufactured, his compliments hollow. He was surrounded by a phalanx of equally sleek young men in sharp suits, lawyers from the prestigious firm Skadden, Arps, Slate, Mager and Flom. Arthur's own team, led by his longtime general counsel Robert Henshaw, looked tired and outmatched, like old lions facing a pack of hungry wolves. Robert slid the final signature page in front of him, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the line marked with a small yellow flag. "Everything's in order, Arthur. We've been through it 100 times. It's a clean deal. A clean deal. $11 billion. It was a staggering sum, enough to fund his charitable foundation for a century. It was the logical conclusion. The smart move. He uncapped his custom Mont Blanc pen, the one Martha had given him for their 40th anniversary. Its nib was solid gold, its weight familiar and comforting in his hand. This was it. The end of an era. He took a deep breath, the filtered air of the pinnacle room feeling suddenly thin and suffocating. He thought of his first employee, a man named Frank Miller, who had lost 2 fingers on a stamping press in 1975. Arthur had personally driven him to the hospital and paid for his children's college education. He thought of the thousands of families in Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania who depended on the pensions and healthcare plans he had fought to protect for decades. Stryker had assured him of Vanguard's commitment to the employees. "The Sterling family is our family now," he'd said with that predatory smile. Arthur had wanted to believe him. He had to believe him. His hand was steady as he lowered the pen. The gold nib was a millimeter from the crisp, heavy paper. The silence in the room was absolute, a held breath of anticipation. It was a moment pregnant with the weight of history finance and the future of 50,000 lives. And then a ghost of a sound, a whisper. Chloe Jensen's hands were trembling, but not from the weight of the silver tray holding a bottle of sparkling water. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. From her peripheral vision, she watched the scene at the head table with an intensity that bordered on painful. She was just a waitress, a nobody, a law student at NYU, paying off a mountain of debt by serving overpriced food to men who wouldn't even register her existence. But she knew. God help her, she knew. Her life was a grueling marathon of lectures, study groups, and 8-hour shifts at the Grand Regent Hotel's fine dining restaurant. To make extra money, she had taken on a side gig that utilized her legal training, late-night document review for a temp agency. It was mind-numbing work, sifting through thousands of pages of discovery documents and contracts for large law firms preparing for litigation or major transactions. 3 weeks ago, she had been assigned a rush job. The client was Skadden Arps. The project code was Project Legacy. For 2 straight nights, fueled by coffee and sheer desperation, she had read through draft after draft of a massive acquisition agreement. She'd cross-referenced appendices, checked definitions, and flagged inconsistencies. She didn't know the names of the companies then, only that it was a huge deal involving an old industrial giant and a private equity firm. One section had caught her eye. It was titled The Sterling Legacy Provision. It was an unusually robust and employee-centric part of the contract, explicitly guaranteeing the full funding and protection of the company's pension plan for no less than 25 years. It locked in healthcare benefits for retirees and mandated that any workforce reductions in the first 5 years could only be done through voluntary buyouts and attrition, not layoffs. It was a beautifully crafted piece of legal protection, a fortress built to protect the little guy. She had been impressed, even moved. Then last night, she had seen the final version, a clean-up review, they called it. The section was still there, but the title had been subtly changed. It was now called the Asset Realignment Protocol. The language was dense, almost impenetrable. But Chloe, her eyes trained by thousands of hours of reading legal text, saw the truth. The fortress had been hollowed out from the inside. The 25-year guarantee was replaced with an 18-month review period. The ban on layoffs was replaced with a clause allowing for synergistic workforce restructuring. And buried deep in a subappendix was a provision that allowed the new owner to terminate the existing pension plan and transfer the assets into a new, far less secure 401k program, a move that would save the buyers hundreds of millions of dollars at the expense of lifelong employees. It was a betrayal codified in legalese, a dagger hidden in a bouquet of corporate jargon. She had reported the discrepancy to her temp agency supervisor, who had told her to stick to the brief and that final changes were above her pay grade. She had been a cog in a machine, and the machine was designed to crush people like Frank Miller. Now standing here, watching the legendary Arthur Sterling, the man whose name was on that beautiful protective clause about to sign its corrupted version, she felt a wave of nausea. She could walk away, say nothing, keep her job graduate, and become one of them. Or she could risk it all. Her job, her tuition, her future career. She could be fired, blacklisted. She saw Arthur Sterling's shoulders slump slightly, a flicker of profound weariness in his eyes. She didn't see a billionaire. She saw her own grandfather, who had worked for Bethlehem Steel for 40 years, only to see his pension gutted in a corporate buyout. The memory, sharp and bitter, was the only push she needed. Her training dictated she remain invisible, but her conscience screamed at her to act. Moving with a grace she didn't feel, she approached the table to refill Arthur's water glass. Her movements were fluid, practiced. No one paid her any mind. She was part of the furniture. As she leaned over his right shoulder, her mouth was inches from his ear. Damien Stryker was smiling, his eyes fixed on the pen. Robert Henshaw was already looking relieved. Chloe's world narrowed to that single, terrifying moment. The risk was immense, the reward non-existent. It was simply the right thing to do. Her voice was barely a breath, a secret past in the cathedral of power. Mr. Sterling, she whispered, her words urgent and low, meant for him alone. Don't sign this. Please. Check Appendix D, subsection 11B. The legacy provision. It's been changed. She pulled back instantly, placing the water bottle on the tray, and turning to leave as if nothing had happened. Her heart was a runaway train. She didn't dare look back. She just walked each step in eternity, expecting a hand to grab her shoulder, to hear an angry voice demanding to know what she had done. But all she heard was a sudden, deafening silence, and then the sound of a heavy gold pen being placed very deliberately back on the table. The click of the Mont Blanc pen against the polished obsidian was a small sound, but in the taut silence of the pinnacle room, it echoed like a gunshot. Every head at the table snapped towards Arthur Sterling. Damien Stryker's perfect smile faltered, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes. Arthur, is something wrong? Arthur didn't answer immediately. His mind was racing. The whisper had been so clear, so specific. Appendix D, subsection 11B. The legacy provision. It's been changed. It wasn't a vague warning. It was a precise, actionable piece of intelligence. Who was she? How could a waitress possibly know the internal structure of a multi-billion-dollar acquisition agreement? His first instinct was corporate espionage, a plant from a rival firm, a disgruntled employee. But her face, when he caught a glimpse of it as she turned away, held no malice, only a profound, desperate sincerity and fear. He was a man who had built his empire on judging character, on reading the subtle cues people gave off in high-stakes negotiations. Her fear felt genuine. He looked at his own lawyer, Robert Henshaw. Robert had been with him for 30 years. He was a good lawyer, but he was also 70, comfortable, and perhaps too trusting. He had accepted the assurances from Skadden Arps that the final draft only contained minor housekeeping changes from the version they had approved weeks ago. It was standard practice in deals of this size not to relitigate every single line item at the 11th hour. Trust was the lubricant of commerce. But what if that trust had been betrayed? Arthur Stryker pressed his voice, losing a fraction of its smoothness. The champagne is getting warm. Arthur Sterling raised a hand, a placating gesture that held an unmistakable command. He gave a small, self-deprecating chuckle, a performance honed over decades in boardrooms. Forgive me, Damien, a senior moment. 72 years have a way of catching up to you. There was just one small detail Martha always harped on about. A legacy, she called it. He turned his tired blue eyes on Robert Henshaw. Robert, humor an old man. Let's have another look at the employee pension provisions, the legacy clauses we worked so hard on. Just to be certain. Robert Henshaw blinked, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face before being replaced by professional deference. Arthur, we've been over this. It's ironclad. Skadden confirmed the language mirrors our last red line. I'm sure it does. Arthur said, his voice gentle but firm. But my late wife's ghost is nagging me. Let's just call it a final tribute to her memory. Where are those provisions located again? One of the junior lawyers from Stryker's team. A nervous young man with slicked-back hair spoke up. That would be in Appendix D, sir. The Asset Realignment Protocol. The name hit Arthur like a cold slap. Asset Realignment Protocol. That wasn't what he and Robert had called it. They had called it the Sterling Legacy Provision. It was a small change, but in the world of law, the name of a thing was often the key to its true purpose. The waitress had used the old name. Stryker shot the young lawyer a venomous glare that made the man physically recoil. He then turned back to Arthur, his smile back in place, but it didn't reach his eyes. A new name for a new era, Arthur. A more dynamic, forward-facing term. The spirit of the provision is entirely unchanged, I assure you. I'm sure it is. Arthur repeated the words, now laced with ice. But I find myself in a pedantic mood. Please, Robert, read it for us. Appendix D, subsection 11B. Wasn't it? He looked pointedly at the nervous junior lawyer, who nodded mutely. The request hung in the air, a flagrant breach of deal-closing etiquette. To scrutinize a minor subsection at the signing table was an insult. It implied a lack of trust so profound it could derail the entire process. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The lawyers from Skadden Arps exchanged uneasy glances. Damien Stryker's jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle pulsed in his cheek. Robert Henshaw, flustered, began shuffling through the massive document. It will take a moment to find Arthur. It's a dense document. We have time, Arthur said calmly, leaning back in his chair. He folded his hands over his stomach and fixed his gaze on Damien Stryker. It was a look he had used to break union bosses and bring arrogant suppliers to heel. A look of infinite, patient power. While the lawyer's scrambled Arthur's mind was on the waitress, he needed to speak with her. He needed to know how she knew. He caught the eye of the maitre d', who had been hovering nervously near the door, and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod towards the direction the waitress had gone. It was a gesture that said, "Find her. Keep her here." "Do it quietly," the maitre d', a professional accustomed to the silent commands of the powerful, simply bowed his head and vanished. The game had changed. The signing was no longer a formality. It was now a hunt, and Arthur Sterling, the old lion, who everyone thought was ready to retire to the savannah, had just caught the scent of blood. While Robert Henshaw and his team frantically leafed through the contract, creating a rustle of paper that sounded like dry leaves in the tense silence, Arthur excused himself. "A glass of water for an old man's throat," he announced, pushing his chair back. "Don't start the party without me." Stryker watched him go, his expression a mask of controlled fury. The moment Arthur was out of the room, he turned to his lead counsel. "What the hell is in 11B?" He hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. Arthur ignored the frantic energy behind him. Guided by the discreet maitre d', he was led not doucement to the men's room, but down a service corridor, a stark, sterile world away from the luxury of the pinnacle room. The air here smelled of bleach and cooking grease. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Leaning against a stainless steel food warmer, looking pale and terrified, was the waitress, Chloe Jensen. The maitre d' gave a nod. She was on her way to the locker room, Mr. Sterling. I told her you wished to compliment her on the service. He then melted back into the shadows, leaving them alone. Chloe stood straighter, her hands clenched at her sides. She was preparing to be fired, or worse. Arthur stopped a few feet from her. He looked at her closely for the first time. She was young, maybe 25, with intelligent eyes that held a mixture of fear and defiance. Her uniform was cheap polyester, but she wore it with a kind of dignity. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice quiet, without a trace of anger. "Chloe. Chloe Jensen, sir." "Chloe," he repeated softly. "You took a very big risk in there." She swallowed hard. "I know, sir." "Why?" It was a simple question, but the answer was everything. Chloe took a breath, deciding to tell the unvarnished truth. There was no point in lying to a man like Arthur Sterling. "I'm a law student, sir, at NYU. Second year," she began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "I work here to pay tuition. I also do freelance document review for a temp agency that services big law firms. It's mostly grunt work, but it pays well." Arthur's eyes sharpened with interest. This was no random act of sabotage. This was a professional opinion. "A few weeks ago, Chloe continued, my agency had me on a project for Skaden Arps, codename Project Legacy. I spent 2 nights reviewing the acquisition agreement. Your agreement. I read the original Sterling legacy provision. It was a good clause, sir. It protected everyone. It was clear you cared about your people." A flicker of emotion crossed Arthur's face. Martha had helped him draft the spirit of that clause. Then last night I was assigned to a final review. Small changes, they said. But the name had been changed to the Asset Realignment Protocol. I knew that was a red flag. I read it again. The language was deceptive. They twisted it. They added loopholes you could drive a truck through. The 25-year pension guarantee became an 18-month review period. The layoff protections were gone, replaced by a restructuring clause. They added a new subsection 11B that gave the new owners the right to terminate the defined benefits pension plan entirely and seize the surplus assets after converting it to a basic 401k. She looked him straight in the eye, the fear in her own being eclipsed by the force of her conviction. They didn't just change it, Mr. Sterling. They gutted it. They turned a shield into a sword. And they hid it behind 100 pages of boilerplate. They were counting on no one rereading the whole thing at the last minute. They were counting on you, trusting them. The corridor was silent, save for the hum of the lights. Arthur Sterling stood motionless, processing her words. She had not only identified the change, but had articulated the malicious intent behind it with the clarity of a seasoned lawyer. Seizing the surplus assets of a pension fund, it was a classic predatory private equity move. It could net Vanguard an extra $500 million money stolen from the retirement funds of his employees. He felt a cold, creeping rage, followed by a profound sense of shame. He had almost let this happen. He had been so focused on the finish line, so tired of the fight, that he had nearly betrayed the very people who had built his company alongside him. This young woman, a stranger, had shown more loyalty to the spirit of Sterling Industries in one whispered sentence than his own legal team had in months of negotiation. He looked at Chloe, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt the fog of his grief and weariness begin to lift, replaced by the old familiar fire of purpose. "You said you are a student at NYU. Law?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "What do you intend to do after you graduate?" Chloe blinked, thrown by the question. I hope to work in corporate law, sir. Maybe in-house counsel somewhere. If I haven't just completely torpedoed my career." Arthur Sterling allowed himself a small, grim smile. "On the contrary, Miss Jensen," he said, his voice resonating with a newfound authority. "I think your career has just begun." He turned to head back to the dining room. "Wait here for me. Don't go anywhere. The performance is about to begin, and I want you to have a front row seat." When Arthur Sterling re-entered the Pinnacle Room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Robert Henshaw was sweating, dabbing his forehead with a silk pocket square as he stood over a page in the document, his face pale. Damien Stryker and his team of lawyers stood in a tight, whispering knot, their predatory confidence replaced by a frantic, cornered energy. They all stopped and looked up as Arthur closed the door behind him. Arthur walked calmly back to his seat, the picture of a man unburdened by any care in the world. He sat down and looked expectantly at his lawyer. "Well, Robert?" he asked, his voice deceptively mild. "Did you find the section? Was my old memory playing tricks on me?" Robert Henshaw cleared his throat, unable to meet his client's gaze. He looked down at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. Yes, Arthur. I've found it. Appendix D subsection 11B. Excellent. Arthur beamed, though his eyes were chips of ice. Read it aloud for all of us. I'm sure it's just the same noble language we drafted, perhaps phrased a little differently. For the sake of synergy, he shot the last word at Stryker like a poisoned dart. Stryker took a step forward. Arthur, this is highly irregular. It's an insult to the integrity of my legal team and your own. This is a standard clause designed to provide operational flexibility in a modern business environment. Is it? Arthur replied, his voice dropping to a low growl. Then you should have no objection to hearing it read aloud. Unless, of course, the operational flexibility you're referring to is the flexibility to plunder the pensions of men and women who have given their entire lives to this company. The accusation, raw and direct, struck the room dumb. The pretense of civility was shattered. Now Robert Arthur commanded his voice like steel. Read. With trembling hands, Robert Henshaw began to read. The language was convoluted, a thicket of legal jargon, but its meaning became chillingly clear as he spoke. The acquiring party reserves the right following: an 18-month transitional period to initiate a comprehensive review of all defined benefit obligations. In the event of a planned termination, all surplus assets exceeding the minimum statutory funding requirements shall revert to the parent company for the purposes of capital reallocation and debt servicing. He trailed off, his voice hoarse. He didn't need to read any more. Everyone in the room understood. It was a license to steal written on company letterhead. Robert looked up at Arthur, his face a mask of horror and professional shame. Arthur, I never saw this. It wasn't in the draft we approved. They must have slipped it into the final executable copy. They assured us the changes were cosmetic. Arthur ignored him, his gaze locked on Damien Stryker. The younger man's handsome face was now a tight, bloodless mask of fury. The charm had evaporated, revealing the cold predator beneath. "A clever piece of writing," Arthur said softly, the words dripping with contempt. "My compliments to your lawyers at Skadden Arps. They certainly earned their exorbitant fees. Tell me, Damien, was this your plan all along? Buy my company with my own employees' pension money. How very efficient." Stryker finally broke. "This is business, Arthur. Not a charity. That fund is overfunded by nearly $1 billion. It's a wasted asset on the balance sheet. Your sentimentality is why this company, for all its history, is undervalued. We are here to unlock that value." "Unlock value!" Arthur roared, slamming his hand on the table. The crystal glasses jumped and rang. For the first time, the old lion let out his full voice, a sound of righteous fury that made everyone in the room flinch. "You call theft unlocking value. You stand in this room and talk about balance sheets, but you forget that those assets are the years of sweat and loyalty from thousands of people. They are the promise of a dignified old age for a machinist in Detroit, a line worker in Cleveland, a secretary in Pittsburgh who trusted me. They trusted the name Sterling." He stood up, his full height, seeming to diminish every other person in the room. He reached for the signature page of the contract. Stryker watched a flicker of hope in his eyes, thinking perhaps Arthur would sign it anyway, that the money would win out. Instead, Arthur Sterling took the page in his 2 hands. With deliberate, satisfying force, he tore it cleanly in half. Then he tore it again, and again. He let the pieces of the $11 billion deal flutter from his fingers onto the center of the obsidian table like bitter confetti. "There is no deal," he said, his voice now dangerously quiet. "Get out of my sight." For a moment, no one moved. Then Stryker, his face contorted with rage, pointed a trembling finger at Arthur. "You'll regret this, old man. I'll have my lawyers bury you. We have a signed letter of intent. You can't just walk away." Arthur smiled, a truly terrifying sight. "Your lawyers," he said. "My first call will not be to my lawyers. It will be to the Attorney General of New York and the Securities and Exchange Commission. I imagine they'll be very interested in a case of attempted fraud of this magnitude. And then I'll call the Wall Street Journal. Your firm Vanguard Equity and your partners at Skadden Arps are about to become very, very famous." The threat was devastating and absolute. Stryker's face went white. The careers and reputations of everyone on his side of the table flashed before their eyes. In a flurry of panicked whispers and slammed briefcases, they scrambled out of the room. A defeated army in full retreat. Arthur Sterling stood alone at the head of the table, the pieces of the broken deal before him. His own legal team looked at him with a mixture of awe and terror. He had just walked away from $11 billion. But Arthur Sterling didn't feel like he had lost a thing. He felt like he had just won back his soul. The silence that descended upon the Pinnacle Room after Stryker's chaotic exit was a physical entity heavier and more profound than the soundproofed walls could ever create on their own. It was a vacuum filled with the ghosts of $11 billion and the sharp metallic tang of shattered trust. Arthur Sterling's own team, his lawyers, his bankers, stood frozen, looking like shipwreck survivors on a desolate shore. The magnificent view of Central Park seemed to mock them, a serene, indifferent witness to the corporate carnage. On the obsidian table, the torn pieces of the contract lay scattered, what Arthur had called bitter confetti, a testament to a future that had just been violently unwritten. Robert Henshaw, his face the color of old parchment, took a shaky step towards Arthur. The professional mask he had worn for 40 years had crumbled, revealing the terrified, deeply ashamed man beneath. This wasn't just a failed deal. It was the nadir of his entire career, a catastrophic failure of his most fundamental duty to his client, his friend. Arthur, he began, his voice cracking thick with a lifetime of unspoken loyalty. There are no words, no excuses. I failed you. I got lazy. I trusted their reputation, their assurances. Skadden Arps. You don't expect a firm like that to engage in back-alley fraud. He gestured helplessly at the torn papers. I should have read every line myself, even if it took all night. I should have. Martha would never have let me get away with such carelessness. The invocation of his late wife's name struck Arthur, but not with the sting Robert might have expected. Instead, it brought a strange clarity. He looked at his old friend, seeing not a traitor, but a reflection of his own fatigue. We both got complacent, Robert. Arthur said, his voice surprisingly gentle, devoid of the thunder he had unleashed on Stryker. The rage had burned away, leaving a core of cold, hard purpose. We both started thinking about the end of the story, instead of paying attention to the chapter we were in. We forgot that the world is full of hungry wolves, and they love nothing more than a sleeping lion. He placed a hand on Robert's shoulder, a gesture of weary forgiveness. This isn't on you alone. It's on me for wanting it to be over. But it's not over. It's just beginning. His gaze shifted to the grand door. He had a new general for this new war, and it was time for her enlistment. He caught the eye of the maitre d', who still hovered nervously in the doorway, and gave a simple, clear nod. Please send Miss Jensen in. A moment later, Chloe entered the room. If she had felt overwhelmed before, she now looked like a lone foot soldier, wandering onto the command deck of a battleship after a major battle. She took in the scene, the stunned, powerful men, the august, silent room, and the billionaire who stood at the center of the storm, looking not diminished but somehow larger, more vital than before. Her eyes fell to the destroyed contract, and she felt a fresh wave of terror mixed with a bewildering sense of vindication. Arthur gestured for her to approach the table, his demeanor calm and reassuring. He swept the torn pieces of paper into a small, neat pile, a symbolic clearing of the old, corrupt foundation. He looked at her, his tired blue eyes now holding a spark she hadn't seen before, a flicker of the brilliant, incisive mind that had built an empire. Miss Jensen. He began, his voice resonating with a quiet authority that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. In my 50 years in business, I have encountered thousands of lawyers, bankers, and consultants. I have paid them fees that could fund a small nation, all for their supposedly expert advice. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over his own shell-shocked team before returning it to her. Yet, today, the most valuable, the most crucial piece of counsel I received came not from a senior partner at Sullivan & Cromwell, but from a law student at NYU, working a double shift to pay her tuition. He continued, Courage is a rare commodity, Ms. Jensen, but courage combined with integrity and intelligence that is nearly extinct. Most people would have stayed silent. They would have weighed the personal risk against a problem that wasn't theirs and chosen the path of least resistance. They would have protected themselves. Why didn't you? The question was genuine, his curiosity profound. Chloe swallowed, finding her voice in the cavernous silence. My grandfather worked for Bethlehem Steel his whole life. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice steady. He was promised a pension, a secure retirement. When a private equity firm bought the company in the 90s, they used legal loopholes very similar to the ones I saw in your contract to gut that pension fund. He lost almost everything. He died thinking he had failed his family. I saw that clause and I didn't see legal language. I saw my grandfather's face. I couldn't just serve water and walk away. A deep, knowing sadness touched Arthur's eyes. He nodded slowly. So you understand. You understand that this is not about numbers on a page. It's about people. It's about promises. He straightened up, a new energy coursing through him. I find myself in a unique position. I have just summarily dismissed my M&A advisors and have lost considerable faith in my long-time legal counsel's oversight. And I still own a multi-billion-dollar company that it appears is in desperate need of a moral and ethical immune system. It needs a new generation of leadership, one whose compass is fixed on true north, not magnetic north, which wavers depending on where the money is. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. I am creating a new position. It will report directly to me, and only to me. A director of corporate integrity. This person will be my eyes and ears, an internal watchdog, with the authority to review any contract question, any initiative, and veto any proposal that violates the spirit of this company. They will be a guardian of our principles. It's a position that requires a spine of steel, a brilliant legal mind, and an incorruptible character. He held her gaze. I would like to offer that position to you. Chloe's mind went blank. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. She heard the words, but they didn't compute. Director, report to him. It was an absurd, impossible fantasy. Mr. Sterling, I'm a student, she stammered, the same protest as before, but it felt even more inadequate now. I'm flattered, but I'm not qualified. I haven't even passed the bar exam. You have passed a far more important test today, Ms. Jensen, Arthur said firmly, waving away her objection. As for the rest, it's a matter of logistics. Sterling Industries will immediately pay off your existing student debt in full. We will of course cover every cent of your remaining tuition and expenses at NYU. You will be placed on the executive payroll effective immediately at a salary that will put you in the top percentile of law school graduates. You can work part-time as your studies allow and transition to full-time the day after you pass the bar. He wasn't finished. Your first assignment, he added, a grim smile touching his lips, will be to assist me in finding a new law firm. A pack of bulldogs, not the pampered poodles we've been using. You will help me vet them, interview them, and prepare the litigation we will now be pursuing against Vanguard Equity Partners for fraudulent inducement. You will be in the room for every meeting. It was a complete, overwhelming, life-altering vision of a future she could never have conceived. The crushing weight of her loans, the constant anxiety of making rent, the fear that she would spend her life as a cog in a machine, she despised it all, evaporated in an instant. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden. But this time she didn't fight them. They were tears of shock, of relief, of a profound and staggering gratitude. Say yes, Ms. Jensen, Arthur prompted gently. She took a deep, steadying breath, and for the first time she smiled a genuine, radiant smile that transformed her face. Yes, Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice clear and strong. Yes. I accept. Arthur Sterling extended his hand across the obsidian table over the ruins of the broken deal. Chloe reached out and took it. Her grip was firm, her hand steady. Their handshake was not the perfunctory, bloodless ritual of the corporate world. It was the sealing of a new contract, one not written on paper, but forged in principle. It was a promise to build a better, more honorable future for Sterling Industries. A future where the legacy of a man like Chloe's grandfather would be protected, not plundered. 1 year later, Arthur Sterling stood before the same floor-to-ceiling windows in his corner office. The panoramic view of Central Park, a sea of green and gold under the autumn sun, was unchanged. But the man looking out at it was a different person entirely, forged anew in the crucible of the year that had passed. The weariness that had settled deep in his bones, the quiet grief that had clouded his judgment, was gone. In its place was a formidable clarity, a rediscovered sense of purpose that made him feel more alive at 73 than he had at 60. The year since the disastrous signing in the Pinnacle Room had not been quiet. It had been a war. Following Chloe's advice on her very first assignment, they had not retained a massive established law firm. Instead, they hired a boutique litigation firm out of Chicago, known for its scorched earth tactics and its utter fearlessness in taking on corporate giants. They were the bulldogs he had asked for, and they had been unleashed. The lawsuit filed against Vanguard Equity Partners and Skadden Arps was a masterpiece of legal aggression, accusing them not just of breach of contract, but of conspiracy to commit fraud. Chloe, while still attending her final year of law school, became an indispensable part of the legal team. Her meticulous notes from her time as a temp reviewer, once dismissed by her supervisor, became Exhibit A in the preliminary hearings. She sat beside Arthur during the brutal hours-long depositions, her sharp memory and quick mind often catching Stryker's lawyers in subtle contradictions, earning her the grudging respect of their own legal counsel. The public front of the war was just as ferocious. The Wall Street Journal story had landed like a bomb in the financial world. Titled The Billion-Dollar Betrayal, it detailed the plot to plunder the Sterling Pension Fund, casting Damian Stryker as a modern-day robber baron and Arthur Sterling as the old guard industrialist, making a final stand for his people. The narrative was powerful and clear, thanks to a series of carefully managed interviews with Arthur, who, guided by Chloe, framed the fight not as a deal gone wrong, but as a battle for the soul of American capitalism. The SEC investigation that followed was swift and damning, and within 6 months, Damian Stryker had resigned in disgrace, his golden reputation irrevocably tarnished. Vanguard Equity Partners, facing an exodus of investors and a mountain of legal fees, settled with Sterling Industries for an undisclosed but reputedly staggering sum. But the true revolution wasn't happening in the courtroom or the newspapers. It was happening inside the walls of Sterling Industries itself. Arthur, galvanized by his near-catastrophic mistake, had turned his full attention back to the company he had been so ready to abandon. With Chloe acting as his strategic advisor and moral compass, he didn't just save the company, he remade it. The $2 billion modernization plan was rolled out not as a cost-cutting measure, but as an investment in his workforce. In the Ohio plant, state-of-the-art robotic arms now worked alongside veteran machinists who had been retrained in programming and diagnostics, their decades of experience now more valuable than ever. The new profit-sharing program, initially met with deep skepticism by the union, had silenced all doubters when the first checks were distributed. For the first time, a line worker in Detroit saw a direct reward for the company's success, fostering a sense of shared ownership that no corporate memo ever could. And in honor of his late wife, Arthur had established the Martha Sterling Memorial Scholarship Fund an endowment that would pay for the college education of employees' children for generations to come. Through it all, Chloe's transformation had been nothing short of meteoric. She had juggled the immense pressure of her new role with the final grueling months of law school. There were nights she'd leave a tense strategy session with the lawyers at 10 p.m., only to spend the next 4 hours studying for her corporate finance exam. She graduated, as predicted, at the very top of her class. The day she was sworn into the New York bar, Arthur had closed the entire executive floor and held a reception in her honor. Her office was now next to his, a spacious room with warm walnut furniture and the same breathtaking view. It was a world away from her cramped apartment, and she never forgot it. She had become Arthur's most trusted confidant. He valued her sharp, legal mind, but he treasured her perspective even more. She saw the company not as a collection of assets, but as a community of people, and her influence was felt in every major decision. She had quietly but firmly vetoed a plan to switch to a cheaper health insurance provider, and had championed a new policy for paid parental leave, arguing successfully that stable families made for a stable workforce. On this particular afternoon, she walked into Arthur's office holding a folder. She had the same quiet dignity as the day he first met her, but now it was layered with a calm, earned confidence. "Good news," she said, her smile bright. The board just gave final approval for the new childcare initiative. The plans for the on-site centers at the 3 largest plants are being drawn up now. We should be able to break ground by spring. Arthur turned from the window, a genuine smile spreading across his face. The initiative had been Chloe's passion project for the last 6 months. She had built the case for it with impeccable data, showing how it would reduce employee absenteeism and increase retention among young parents. But her winning argument had been a moral one. "We can't call ourselves a family company," she had told the board, "if we force our employees to choose between their careers and their children." He took the folder and looked at the preliminary designs. Then he looked at Chloe. "You fought for this. The CFO said it was an unnecessary expense. You changed his mind. You changed all their minds. I had a good teacher," she replied, her gaze meeting his. "Someone who taught me that the best arguments come from the heart, but they need to be backed up by the facts. Besides, I just showed them the letters." She tapped the folder. Tucked inside were dozens of emails she had collected from employees, mothers and fathers who spoke of the daily struggle to find affordable, reliable childcare. Arthur nodded, a profound sense of peace settling over him. He had spent his life building a legacy of steel and industry, of market share and profit margins. He had been ready to sign it all away, to encase that legacy in the amber of a financial transaction. But Chloe's whisper had shattered the amber. It had forced him to see that a legacy isn't a monument you build and leave behind. It is a living thing that must be tended to, that must evolve and grow and breathe. The new Sterling legacy was not just about him anymore. It was about the profit-sharing check that helped a family afford their first home. It was about the scholarship that sent a machinist's daughter to medical school. It was about the on-site daycare that would allow a young mother to advance in her career without sacrificing time with her child. He hadn't sold his company. He had given it a new soul. And in Chloe Jensen, the waitress who had risked everything for a principle, he had found the perfect guardian to ensure that soul would never again be put up for sale. And so Arthur Sterling didn't just walk away from a deal. He walked back to the principles that built his empire in the first place. This story serves as a powerful reminder that true value isn't always found in an $11 billion price tag. Sometimes it's found in the courage of one person who dares to speak truth to power, even in a whisper. Chloe Jensen didn't just save a company. She resurrected its soul, and in doing so forged her own incredible destiny. Her story shows that your current position doesn't define your potential impact. What did you think of Chloe's incredible bravery? Have you ever had a gut feeling that something was wrong and decided to speak up? Share your own experiences in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories of courage, big or small. If this story of integrity, triumphing over greed, resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that one voice can make a difference. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story that will inspire and surprise you. Thanks for listening. What happens when a dream born from grief and flour-dusted hands collides with the cold, hard world of corporate greed? For Nina Petrov, a 26-year-old waitress drowning in debt, her dream was a small, forgotten cafe. For Finian Doyle, a billionaire who treated the city like his personal chessboard, her dream was a joke. He laughed in her face, a casual cruelty he wouldn't remember moments later. But Nina would. She'd remember the laughter as she fought for the one thing that mattered. She had no money, no connections, no power. What she did have was a secret weapon, a story he never knew he was a part of. The restaurant Cielo was a cathedral of modern wealth. Spun glass chandeliers dripped light onto tables set with starched white linen, and the clinking of cutlery was a delicate, expensive sound. From her station by the kitchen doors, Nina Petrov saw it all as a world behind glass. She wasn't part of it. She was just a ghost who refilled water glasses and cleared away the remnants of $300 steaks. Tonight, the ghost was tired. Her feet throbbed in her sensible black shoes, a dull ache that radiated up her spine. Her shift had started 10 hours ago, and in 3 more, she would be free to go home to her shoebox apartment, where a stack of final notice bills sat waiting like vultures. Her section included the most coveted table Booth 7 currently occupied by the man everyone in the financial district of New York City spoke of in hushed, reverent tones: Finian Doyle. He was handsome in a severe, sculpted way, with silver-streaked hair and eyes the color of a winter storm. He radiated an aura of immense, unshakable power. The man across from him, a nervous-looking executive in a suit a size too tight, was sweating under the Arctic blast of Doyle's indifference. Nina approached the table, her professional smile pasted on. "Can I get you gentlemen anything else? Coffee, dessert?" The executive waved her away, but Doyle held up a hand, his gaze sweeping over her for the first time. It wasn't a look of interest, but of clinical assessment, as if he were calculating her net worth and finding it wanting. "Coffee," he said, his voice a low baritone that could command armies. "Black." "And for you, sir?" she asked the other man. Nothing for me, thank you." As Nina turned to leave, Doyle spoke again, a casual question that would shatter her evening. "You look exhausted, miss. Long day chasing tips." It wasn't meant to be kind. It was an observation, a statement of fact from a man who dealt only in them. Nina's smile faltered for a second. "It's been a busy night, sir." "Busy is good. Keeps you from indulging in pointless fantasies." He mused more to himself than to her. He took a sip of water, his eyes scanning the restaurant floor. Everyone in this city thinks they're one lucky break away from being a star, an artist, a business mogul. They waste their lives dreaming instead of working. Nina felt a prickle of defiance. She thought of the worn, leather-bound book in her apartment, its pages filled with her grandmother's spidery handwriting, recipes for pastries, breads, and cakes that tasted of love and old-world comfort. She thought of the little boarded-up shop on Sullivan Street, the Gilded Spoon, with its faded gold lettering and dusty windows, the place she pictured every single night as she fell asleep. "I have a dream," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The words were out before she could stop them. Doyle's gaze snapped back to her. He raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Oh, do tell. Are you going to be the next Meryl Streep? Or have you written the great American novel on your lunch breaks?" The executive at the table snickered nervously. Humiliation washed over Nina, hot and sharp. She should have stayed quiet. But something in his condescending tone ignited a spark in her. "I'm going to own a cafe," she said, lifting her chin. "A small place, where people can feel at home. I'm a baker." For a moment, there was silence. Then Finian Doyle threw his head back and laughed. It wasn't a jolly sound. It was sharp, cutting, and utterly dismissive. It echoed in the hushed restaurant, turning heads. The sound sliced through Nina like a physical blow. "A cafe," he repeated, wiping a tear of mirth from the corner of his eye. "Wonderful. The world is short on overpriced coffee and gluten-free muffins. Let me give you some free advice, miss. Petrov," she supplied, her voice tight. "Miss Petrov, dreams are liabilities for people in your position. They're distractions from the reality of your life, which is rent bills and survival. Stick to what's real. Stick to serving coffee, not selling it." He waved a dismissive hand. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have actual business to discuss." Nina felt the blood drain from her face. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. She managed a single clipped nod and retreated to the sanctuary of the kitchen, the sound of his laughter following her. The chefs and other staff averted their eyes, pretending they hadn't heard. But she knew they had. The billionaire in booth 7 had just declared her life's ambition to be a joke, and the whole world had listened. For the rest of her shift she moved on autopilot, her body performing the tasks while her mind replayed that laugh over and over. It was the sound of every door that had ever been slammed in her face, every person who had ever told her she wasn't good enough. When she finally stumbled out into the cool night air, she didn't head straight for the subway. Instead, her tired feet carried her downtown through the winding streets of Greenwich Village until she stood before it. The Gilded Spoon. It was even sadder looking at night. The windows were grimy, and a for lease sign had been plastered over the beautiful curved glass of the door. But Nina saw past that. She saw the potential. She imagined the warm glow of lights from within the smell of fresh-baked cinnamon rolls and dark roast coffee spilling onto the sidewalk. She imagined small round tables, a counter piled high with her grandmother's recipes, and the happy chatter of neighbors and friends. This was more than a dream. It was a legacy. Her grandmother Anya had worked as a cook her whole life, saving every penny for a place just like this. She'd died before she could achieve it, leaving Nina with only the recipe book and the burning desire to finish what she'd started. Leaning her forehead against the cool glass, Nina whispered, "I'll do it, Grandma. I don't care what people like him say. I'll find a way." A piece of paper smaller and newer than the leasing sign caught her eye. It was taped to the inside of the window. She squinted to read the stark corporate font under the dim streetlight. Notice of acquisition. This property, along with the adjoining lots, has been acquired by Doyle Holdings Development Group. All inquiries should be directed to our main office. The world tilted on its axis. Doyle Holdings. Finian Doyle. The man who had laughed at her dream of owning a cafe had just bought it. Not to cherish it, she knew, but to tear it down. To replace it with some soulless glass tower, another monument to his own ego. The humiliation from the restaurant curdled into a cold, hard fury. He hadn't just laughed at her dream. He was actively, unknowingly destroying it. The casual cruelty of the rich had just become devastatingly personal. Right there on that dark, empty street, with the ghost of her grandmother's hopes beside her, Nina Petrov made a decision. This wasn't over. He might have all the money and the power, but he had just made a formidable enemy. He just didn't know it yet. The next morning, sleep-deprived but running on a potent cocktail of caffeine and rage, Nina called in sick to Cielo. Her boss, Brenda, a woman whose personality was as sour as spoiled milk, was predictably unpleasant. "Sick again. Nina, you know we have the lunch rush. This is highly unprofessional." "It's a personal emergency, Brenda," Nina said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil raging within her. "Everything's an emergency with you," Brenda grumbled before hanging up. Nina ignored the sting. She had bigger problems. She spent the next 2 hours on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She researched Doyle Holdings, and what she found made her stomach sink. They were a corporate leviathan swallowing up entire city blocks, replacing character and history with luxury condos and high-rent commercial spaces. They were notorious for their aggressive tactics, buying out small property owners with low-ball offers and threats of eminent domain. The Gilded Spoon wasn't a special case. It was just another domino in their city-wide conquest. Her search led her to the current owner of the Gilded Spoon, a man named George Henderson. A quick public records search gave her an address in Queens. With a deep breath, she put on her most presentable coat, grabbed her grandmother's recipe book for courage, and took the subway out of the city. Mr. Henderson lived in a small, tidy brick house with a garden in the front now withered by the late autumn chill. An elderly man with kind, watery eyes and a frail stoop answered the door. He looked tired, defeated. "Mr. Henderson?" Nina asked gently. "Yes. Can I help you?" "My name is Nina Petrov. I wanted to talk to you about the Gilded Spoon." The light in his eyes dimmed further. "If you're from that Doyle company, I've already signed the papers. There's nothing left to say." No, I'm not with them," she said quickly. I'm a baker. I've loved your cafe for years. I used to go there with my grandmother. I always dreamed of..." well, of one day taking it over. Mr. Henderson studied her for a long moment, then sighed and opened the door wider. "Come in, child. It's cold out." His living room was filled with memories, photographs on the mantelpiece, worn armchairs, the faint scent of pipe tobacco and old books. He told her the story. He and his late wife had run the Gilded Spoon for 40 years. It was their life. But since she passed, his health had declined and the business had suffered. The property taxes kept rising and he'd fallen behind. "Doyle Holdings came in like sharks," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "They knew I was in trouble. Their initial offer was an insult. When I refused, they bought up my debt from the city. They threatened foreclosure. They told me they were buying the whole block, and if I didn't sell, they'd use eminent domain, and I'd get even less. They gave me no choice." He wrung his thin hands. "I'm so sorry. I know what that place means to the neighborhood. To lose it to a man like that." "Finian Doyle." Nina finished for him, the name tasting like poison. "He's the architect of its ruin," Mr. Henderson whispered. Nina opened her bag and placed the leather-bound recipe book on the coffee table between them. "My grandmother Anya, she was a baker. She came here from Ukraine with nothing. She worked in kitchens her whole life. This was her dream." She opened the book, showing him the elegant Cyrillic-laced script. "She wrote down every recipe, every secret. I learned to bake from this book. My dream isn't just to own a cafe, Mr. Henderson. It's to bring this book and her memory to life. And I wanted to do it there, in your cafe." Tears welled in the old man's eyes as he gently touched the book's cover. "Anya Petrov. I remember her. She used to come in on Sunday mornings. She always said our coffee was the only one in the city that tasted like home. She had a wonderful smile." Nina's heart clenched. The connection was deeper than she'd even known. This wasn't just any cafe. Her grandmother had loved this exact spot. "He can't just tear it down," Nina said, her voice thick with emotion. "There's too much history. Too many memories." "What can we do?" Mr. Henderson said, his shoulders slumping. "The deal is done. They're probably drawing up the demolition permits as we speak." An idea, wild and desperate, began to form in Nina's mind. It was a long shot, a 1 in a billion chance. "Mr. Henderson," she said, leaning forward, "did you cash the check from Doyle Holdings yet?" "No, it's sitting on the kitchen counter. I couldn't bring myself to deposit it. It feels like blood money." "Then the transaction isn't technically complete," Nina said, her mind racing. "There might be a loophole, a chance. But I need to get to him. I need to get to Finian Doyle." Getting to a man like Doyle was like trying to get an audience with a king. His office was a fortress on the 80th floor of Doyle Tower. His assistant, a terrifyingly efficient woman named Genevieve, was known in the business world as the gatekeeper. Nina spent the rest of the day crafting a business plan. It was a frantic, desperate effort. She used the free Wi-Fi at a public library, her laptop propped on a wobbly table. She detailed a 5-year projection based on her grandmother's low-cost, high-quality recipes. She created a marketing plan focused on community engagement and local charm. She outlined a vision for Anya's Spoon, a place that would be the antithesis of the soulless chains popping up everywhere. She poured every ounce of her passion, her grief, and her anger into that document. The next day, she dressed in her only decent blazer, printed out her plan, and went to Doyle Tower. As expected, she didn't get past the front desk. "Mr. Doyle doesn't take unscheduled appointments," the receptionist said with practiced boredom. "Could you at least give this to his assistant, Genevieve?" Nina pleaded, holding out her folder. The receptionist looked at the folder as if it were contaminated. "You can leave it. No guarantees." Nina knew it would end up in a recycling bin. She left the building feeling defeated, the towering glass structure mocking her. Desperation clawed at her. What would a man like Doyle do? He wouldn't wait by the door. He would find a different way in. She remembered the executive from the restaurant, the nervous man. She'd overheard his name, Frank Peterson. A few clever searches on LinkedIn, and she found him vice president of acquisitions at a rival firm. He'd been trying to make a deal with Doyle. Taking another wild gamble, she called his office. Frank Peterson's office. "Hi, my name is Nina Petrov. I was Mr. Doyle's server at Cielo the other night, and I found something Mr. Peterson may have left behind at the table. I believe it's a sensitive document." It was a complete lie, but a plausible one. It worked. 10 minutes later, a flustered Frank Peterson was on the line. "Yes, hello, this is Frank. You found something?" "I think so," Nina said, her heart pounding. "I work at Cielo. I didn't want to just hand it over to the restaurant's lost and found. It looked important. Oh God, I knew I forgot something. My notes. Where can I meet you?" They agreed to meet at a coffee shop near his office. When he arrived looking harried, Nina had a cup of coffee waiting for him. "Here you are," she said, handing him the empty folder that contained her business plan. He opened it, his face clouding with confusion. "This isn't mine. This is a business plan for a cafe." "I know," Nina said calmly. "There was no document, Frank. I needed 5 minutes of your time. Please don't be angry. I just need to know one thing. How do I get to Finian Doyle, not his office? Him." Frank looked at her, a mixture of annoyance and grudging respect in his eyes. He probably admired the audacity. He sighed. "You're the waitress he laughed at," he said, a flicker of recognition dawning. Nina nodded, her cheeks flushing. He looked around the coffee shop, then leaned in. "He's a creature of habit. Every morning, 700 a.m. sharp, he's at the promenade by the East River, near the old Pepsi-Cola sign. He goes for a run. No security, no assistance. Just him and the pavement. It's the only time of day the man is even remotely human. But I'm warning you, he won't be happy to see you. Approaching him, there is a career-ending move for me, and a fool's errand for you." "Thank you," Nina said, grabbing her folder. "That's all I needed to know." As she walked out of the coffee shop, she felt a sliver of hope. It was a crazy plan. Confronting a billionaire on his morning run was the stuff of bad romantic comedies. But her grandmother didn't raise her to be timid. Finian Doyle thought her dream was a fantasy. Tomorrow morning, she was going to make it his reality. The air at 6:45 a.m. by the East River was bitingly cold. The sky was a bruised purple, slowly giving way to the pale grey of dawn. Nina stood on the promenade, her breath pluming in front of her. She clutched her folder to her chest, the papers inside feeling flimsy and inadequate. Doubt was a cold snake coiling in her stomach. What was she doing? This was insane. The man could have her arrested for harassment. Then she saw him, a lone figure running with a powerful, relentless rhythm. Even in a simple grey tracksuit, Finian Doyle was unmistakable. He was a shark built for constant forward motion. As he drew closer, Nina stepped directly into his path. He stopped short, irritation flashing across his features before recognition dawned. "You," he said, his voice clipped. He didn't even try to remember her name. "The waitress. Are you stalking me?" "No, Mr. Doyle," Nina said, her voice shaking only slightly. She held out the folder. "I'm making a business proposition." He scoffed, a humorless puff of air. "I already gave you my free advice. I'm not interested in your cafe. My cafe, the Gilded Spoon on Sullivan Street, the one your company just bought out from under an old man you strong-armed into selling. That got his attention. His eyes narrowed. He looked at her properly now, seeing not just a waitress, but an adverse. My company acquires properties. It's what we do. It's not personal. It is to me, Nina shot back. And it was to George Henderson. And it was to my grandmother who loved that place. You see a lot number on a deed, Mr. Doyle. I see a legacy, and I'm here to buy it back. A flicker of something not amusement, but perhaps curiosity crossed his face. With what your tips from last night? The insult landed, but Nina stood her ground. With this, she said, tapping the folder, a viable business plan, a vision, and a counteroffer. A counteroffer. He repeated the words, dripping with sarcasm. My company paid just under $1 million for that property and the debt attached to it. Don't waste my time. He made to run past her, but Nina moved with him, blocking his path again. You're not going to just tear it down, she said, her voice rising with passion. You're not going to replace a piece of this city's heart with another one of your empty glass boxes. That place has a soul. You wouldn't understand that because you only deal in concrete and steel. But people need places with soul, places that feel like home. Something in her words, in the raw, unpolished fire in her eyes, seemed to strike a chord. He stopped his gaze unfocused for a second, looking past her as if at a memory. The hardness in his expression softened for a fleeting instant. What's in the folder? He asked, his tone shifting from dismissive to demanding. My plan. Projections. A menu based on my grandmother's recipes. And a proposal. Don't demolish it. Let me run it. I'll lease it from you. I'll pay you a percentage of the profits. In 5 years, I'll buy the property from you outright for a 10% premium on what you paid. He was silent for a long time, studying her. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a golden glow on the water. The city was waking up around them. You have no capital, he stated. No experience running a business. Your plan is based on sentimentality, and your projections are based on wishful thinking. No bank would ever give you a loan. Then you give me the loan, Nina countered, emboldened. You're the one who owns it. Be my investor. If I succeed, you make a profit, and you get to tell everyone you fostered a small local business. Good bow for the corporate shark. If I fail... She swallowed hard. Then you can tear it down, and you've lost nothing but a little time. Finian Doyle looked at her, then at the folder, then back at her. The calculating look returned to his eyes. He wasn't seeing her dream anymore. He was seeing an angle, a challenge. He was a man who loved games, and she had just proposed a new one. This is absurd, he said, but the bite was gone from his voice. He took the folder from her hand. You're either the bravest woman in New York, or the most foolish. He tucked the folder under his arm. I'll read it. He started to jog away. Wait, Nina called out. What does that mean? He stopped and looked back at her over his shoulder. It means you have 1 week. 1 week to prove to me that this isn't just a fantasy. I'm not going to be your investor. You want this cafe, you earn it. I have another offer on the table for that location. A national coffee chain, Iron Mug Coffee. Their representative is a man named Dexter Reed. He's efficient, he's corporate, and he's offering me a guaranteed 20-year lease with 0 risk. He started jogging again, backwards this time. In 1 week, I'm meeting with him to finalize the paperwork. If you want me to rip up that contract and consider yours, you need to bring me more than just paper. Show me something real. Show me you can do more than just dream. And with that, he turned and disappeared down the promenade. leaving Nina standing alone in the morning light, her heart hammering against her ribs. 1 week. It was an impossible deadline. It was a test designed for her to fail. But it was also a chance. The door had been locked, and he had just cracked it open, just a sliver. It was up to her to kick it down. The game was on. The week that followed was a blur of sleepless nights and frantic days. Nina felt like she was fighting a multi-front war with time money and her own exhaustion as her primary enemies day one. The Alliance. Nina's first stop was back in Queens at George Henderson's house. She told him everything: the confrontation with Doyle, the impossible 1-week deadline, the threat of iron mug coffee. Dexter Reed, Mr. Henderson spat the name out. He's the vulture who was circling before Doyle even showed up, a slick corporate parasite. Doyle said I need to show him something real, Nina said, pacing the small living room. He thinks this is a fantasy. How do I make it real with no money and no keys to the building? Mr. Henderson looked at the recipe book on the table, then at Nina's determined face. A spark of the fight he thought he'd lost returned to his eyes. We can't get inside the cafe, but we can bring the cafe to the people. He stood up a little straighter than before. My wife and I, we had suppliers, local people, a dairy farmer upstate, a coffee roaster in Brooklyn, a family-run mill for our flour. They loved us. Let me make some calls. Maybe they'll help. Day 2. The Guerrilla Bakery. Mr. Henderson was true to his word. By noon the next day, his old suppliers, hearing the story of the fight against a corporate giant, had fronted Nina a small amount of inventory on credit. A sack of flour, a crate of eggs, butter, sugar, and several pounds of artisan roasted coffee beans appeared on Mr. Henderson's doorstep. Nina turned his small, dated kitchen into a whirlwind of activity. For the next 24 hours, she baked. She followed her grandmother's recipes with a reverence she'd never felt before. She made Anya's famous poppy seed, rolls of rich, dark chocolate babka, and delicate almond crescent cookies that melted in the mouth. The house filled with a warm, heavenly aroma, a scent of defiance and hope. Mitt Henderson, acting as her sous chef, ground coffee beans and hummed old tunes, looking happier than he had in years. Day 3. The first shot. On Wednesday morning, Nina and Mr. Henderson set up a folding table and 2 chairs on the sidewalk in front of the shuttered Gilded Spoon. They had a large thermal carafe of fresh brewed coffee and plates piled high with the baked goods. A hand-painted sign read, "Save the Gilded Spoon. Have a taste of what we're fighting for. Donations welcome." At first, people rushed past, ignoring them. The city was a river of hurried indifference. But then the smell hit them, the irresistible aroma of fresh coffee and warm baking. A woman on her way to work stopped curious. Nina offered her a free poppy seed roll. The woman's eyes widened in surprise at the taste. She dropped a $5 bill into their donation jar and promised to tell her office. Slowly, a trickle of people became a stream. Neighbors came out lamenting the cafe's closure. They shared memories of Mr. Henderson and his wife. They tasted Nina's baking and were won over. The donation jar started to fill up. Nina didn't just hand out pastries. She handed out flyers she'd printed at the library, telling her story, Mr. Henderson's story, and asking people to sign a petition. By late afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. A man in an impeccably tailored suit stepped out. He was handsome, with a predator's smile. Dexter Reed. He walked over to their small table, surveying the scene with disdain. "Cute," he said, picking up an almond cookie without asking. "A little bake sale. Is this your grand strategy to compete with a multi-million-dollar corporation? This is our community, Nina said, her voice steady. Something you can't buy. Dexter popped the cookie in his mouth. Not bad, he admitted. But taste doesn't pay the rent. Mr. Doyle is a man who respects numbers, not nostalgia. And my numbers are better than yours. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Take a bit of advice, walk away. I could even arrange a job for you as a shift manager at one of my new locations. Better pay than waitressing. I'm not looking for a job, Nina said, her eyes flashing. I'm building a home. Now, if you're not going to buy anything, you're blocking my customers. Dexter laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You have spirit. It's a shame you're wasting it on a lost cause. He dropped his business card on the table. The offer stands, for now. He got back in his car and drove off, leaving a chill in the air. Day 4 and 5, the sabotage. The next day, their small operation was shut down. A city health inspector showed up, citing an anonymous complaint about selling food on the street without a permit. He was apologetic but firm. They had to pack up. Nina and Mr. Henderson were devastated. It was Dexter, Mr. Henderson fumed. He's playing dirty. Nina felt a wave of despair. It was one thing to fight fairly, another to be crushed by underhanded corporate tactics. She retreated to the library, her heart heavy. How could she compete with that? As she sat there staring blankly at her petition list, an idea sparked. She couldn't sell on the street, but she could give things away, and she could mobilize her growing support base. She spent the next 2 days working the phones and her new email list. She organized a community potluck and rally to save the spoon. She called local news outlets, pitching it as a David versus Goliath story. To her surprise, a blogger from a popular city food blog and a freelance reporter for a local paper said they'd come. The rally held that Saturday in the small park across from the cafe was bigger than she'd ever imagined. Dozens of people showed up, bringing their own dishes to share. Nina and Mr. Henderson brought hundreds of pastries, giving them away for free. People signed her petition, which now had over 1,000 names. They held up signs. The food blogger live-streamed the event, and the reporter interviewed Nina, Mr. Henderson, and angry neighbors. Nina stood on a park bench and spoke, her voice ringing with a confidence she didn't know she possessed. She spoke of her grandmother, of community, of the fight for the city's soul against corporate greed. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was a leader. Day 6. The final gamble. Sunday was her last day. The meeting with Doyle was on Monday morning. She had the petition, some media buzz, and a jar with a few $1,000s in donations, a pittance compared to what she needed. It wasn't enough. Doyle wanted to see something real. He respected numbers and power. She looked at Dexter Reed's card, which she'd kept. The offer stands, for now. A terrifying high-stakes idea came to her. It was a bluff, a poker move, with her entire dream on the line. She called the number. Dexter Reed. Mr. Reed, it's Nina Petrov. Ah, the baker. Have you come to your senses? He asked, his voice slick with smugness. I've considered your offer, Nina said, forcing her voice to sound weary and defeated. I think you were right. This is a lost cause. I'm tired of fighting. There was a pause on the other end. He was surprised. A wise decision. I told you I could find a place for you at Iron Mug. I'm not interested in a job, Nina said. I'm interested in a buyout. You want my cooperation, you can pay for it. I have a community petition with over 1,000 signatures. I have a local media story about to run that paints you and Doyle as villains. I can make things very difficult, or I can walk away and endorse the transition, making you look like a hero who is working with the community." Silence. He was calculating. "What do you want?" $25,000. Nina said the number, feeling impossibly large in her mouth. "For my silence, my petition list, and for me to disappear." Dexter laughed. "You have nerve, I'll give you that. 10,000. And I want you to sign a non-disclosure agreement." 20. Nina counted, her heart hammering. "And you bring a certified check to my meeting with Mr. Doyle tomorrow morning, in front of him. I want him to see that my fantasy was worth a $20,000 nuisance fee to his chosen partner." This was the real gamble. She wanted Finian to see that her influence, her soft power, had a tangible monetary value, a value his own partner was willing to pay. Dexter was quiet for a long moment. "You're a clever girl," he finally said. "Fine. 20,000. I'll see you at Doyle Tower tomorrow at 9 a.m. It will be a pleasure to watch you sell out your own dream." He hung up. Nina leaned against the wall, her legs shaking. She had just sold her soul, or at least pretended to. The final battle would not be fought on the street with pastries, but in the glass and steel heart of her enemy's empire. And she had no idea if her gambit would save her dream or destroy it completely. The elevator ascended in unnerving silence, a smooth, swift climb that felt less like movement and more like the world was shrinking beneath them. Nina Petrov stood rigidly, her knuckles white where she clutched the worn folder to her chest. Beside her, Dexter Reed radiated a smug, predatory confidence. He adjusted the knot of his silk tie, the picture of a man who had already won. "Try to look less like you're facing a firing squad, Baker," he murmured, his voice a low sneer meant only for her. "You've made a smart move. Pragmatism always wins. Remember to act grateful." Nina's stomach churned. The lie she had told him, the $20,000 bluff, felt like a lead weight in her gut. She had meant it as a weapon, a final desperate gambit to prove her worth. But now, in this sterile, pressurized environment, it felt like what it was, a betrayal of her own dream. The doors hissed open, revealing not an office, but a private lobby. It was a cathedral of minimalist power, a vast space of polished grey marble and towering panes of glass. The air was still and cool, smelling faintly of expensive leather and something clean like mountain air. The silence was absolute, designed to make one feel small, insignificant. Far below the city of New York, sprawled out like a circuit board, a toy city he owned. Nina felt a tremor of fear, a primal instinct to turn and flee. "Mr. Doyle will see you now," a voice said, crisp and devoid of warmth. Genevieve, the infamous gatekeeper, stood beside a set of colossal frosted glass doors. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes assessed Nina with a quick, dismissive glance that said, "You do not belong here." Dexter strode forward confidently. "Thank you, Genevieve." He shot a final triumphant smirk at Nina before the great doors swept open. The office beyond was breathtaking. It felt less like a room and more like a cliff edge at the top of the world. An immense single pane of glass formed the entire back wall, offering a 180-degree godlike view of Manhattan. The rising sun glinted off 1,000 distant windows. The furniture was sparse and deliberate, a massive desk of dark, gleaming mahogany that looked like it had been carved from a single ancient tree. 2 severe but beautiful leather chairs positioned before it, and on the far wall a single enormous abstract painting of chaotic, swirling colors. Finian Doyle was not behind his desk. He stood with his back to them, hands clasped behind him, a lone silhouette against the blinding morning light. He was observing his kingdom. Dexter, ever the sycophant, cleared his throat and began to advance across the marble floor, his expensive shoes clicking with an unnatural loudness in the silence. "Mr. Doyle, good morning." Dexter began, his voice oozing practiced charm. "A pleasure as always. We're here to finalize our agreement for the Sullivan Street property. I have the revised lease agreement right here. And as a sign of our commitment to a seamless partnership and good community optics, Ms. Petrov has agreed to." "I know what she's agreed to," Doyle said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, yet it cut through Dexter's speech like a shard of ice, stopping him dead in his tracks. The air in the room crackled with sudden tension. Doyle didn't turn. He remained a formidable silhouette against the sky. Nina's blood ran cold. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. Her carefully constructed bluff, her final desperate gambit, had been seen. She felt a flush of hot shame rise up her neck. "My head of security." Doyle continued, his voice still unnervingly calm. "Placed a small team to monitor the rally yesterday, for insurance purposes, of course. They provided me with a full transcript of the event." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I also had your phone conversation from last night, recorded and transcribed." A choked, strangled sound escaped Dexter's throat. Nina watched, frozen, as the blood drained from his handsome face, leaving behind a pasty grey mask of terror. His smug confidence evaporated, replaced by the raw panic of a courtier who has just fatally misspoke in front of the king. Slowly, deliberately, Finian Doyle turned around. The mask of corporate indifference was gone. His face was granite, and his storm-grey eyes, which had previously swept over Nina with disinterest, were now fixed on her with a frightening intensity. But the expected rage wasn't there. It was something else, something colder and more profound. He took a step forward, his gaze finally shifting to Dexter. $20,000. Doyle said, his voice dropping to a dangerously soft whisper. That was the price you put on silencing a community's voice. You saw her passion, her support, her story, and you saw it not as an asset to be cultivated, but as a nuisance to be paid off and buried. He began to walk towards them, his steps measured and silent on the marble. He was like a shark gliding through the water, all latent power and menace. My partners need to understand the meaning of value, Dexter. Value isn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It's not the guaranteed return on a 20-year lease. Real value is in the things that cannot be easily quantified. Vision, heart loyalty, courage. The very things you tried to extinguish with a checkbook. He stopped directly in front of the now trembling executive. That is why you will never be a partner of mine. He fixed Dexter with a look of utter finality. Our deal is off. Genevieve has been instructed to terminate our preliminary agreements. She will also validate your parking. You can leave now. Dexter stood, sputtering, his composure completely shattered. What Finian this is. This is madness. We had a deal. Her plan is charity. It's sentimental nonsense. It's not a business. It's about legacy. Doyle corrected him, his voice like the snap of a whip. Something you wouldn't understand. Goodbye, Dexter. The dismissal was absolute. For a moment, Dexter looked as if he might argue. But one look at Doyle's unyielding expression, and the fight went out of him. Defeated, humiliated, he shot Nina a look of pure, undiluted venom before turning on his heel. The sound of his footsteps retreating was a frantic, desperate clatter. The heavy glass door clicked shut, and the immense office was plunged back into a profound silence. Nina was alone with Finian Doyle. She stood paralyzed, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She had been so certain that his wrath would fall on Dexter first and then on her. The architect of the lie. He had played his game, and now it was her turn to be crushed. "Sit down," Miss Petrov Doyle said. The harshness in his voice was gone, replaced by a deep weariness that seemed to emanate from his very bones. He gestured to one of the 2 leather chairs. She moved mechanically, her legs feeling unsteady and perched on the edge of the seat. It felt like sinking into a cloud. To her surprise, he didn't move behind the fortress of his desk. He took the chair opposite her, placing them on equal ground. The gesture was so unexpected, it threw her completely off balance. He slid a file across the small, low table between them. It wasn't her own battered folder. This one was thick, professionally bound in dark blue leather. The gold-embossed lettering on the cover read, "Anya's Spoon a Legacy Project." Her breath caught. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside, she saw her own desperate, midnight-fueled work. But it was transformed. Her handwritten menu was now a beautifully designed layout. Her shaky financial projections had been expanded into detailed 5- and 10-year plans, complete with market analysis and demographic studies. There were architectural sketches showing the interior of the Gilded Spoon, not just restored but reborn, keeping its old-world charm while integrating a modern, efficient kitchen. He had taken her fledgling dream and given it wings of steel and glass. "While you were on the street rallying support," he said, his voice softer now, answering her unspoken question, "I put my best strategic team on this. I had them work through the weekend. I also spoke at length with Mr. Henderson. I researched your grandmother, Anya Petrov, a remarkable woman. I read every single word of your plan over and over." He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time the billionaire titan seemed to recede, and a man emerged. A man burdened by something more than the weight of his empire. "I wasn't entirely honest with you on the promenade, Miss Petrov. My connection to that cafe is not just financial." He paused, then reached into a drawer of his desk. He pulled out a simple silver-framed photograph and placed it gently on the table. It was a picture of a much younger Finian Doyle. He was smiling a genuine, unguarded laugh, his arm wrapped tightly around a beautiful woman with kind, intelligent eyes that crinkled at the corners. They were standing on the sidewalk, bathed in afternoon sun, right in front of the familiar faded facade of the Gilded Spoon. "My late wife Eleanor," he said. The name was a whisper of reverence and pain. She was a brilliant architect. She designed skyscrapers, but her real dream, the one she only told me, was to one day quit and open a small bookstore with a cafe. A place with soul, she always called it. A place where people can feel at home amidst the chaos. He looked from the photo to Nina, and in his eyes she saw not a storm, but a vast, desolate sea of grief. The Gilded Spoon was our place. We had our first date there, over coffee that was too strong, and pastries that were according to her perfect. I proposed to her in that corner booth by the window. For 10 years, we went every Sunday. His voice grew thick. After she passed away, I couldn't bear it. I couldn't walk down that street. I buried myself in work, in acquisitions, in deals. I started seeing the world as a collection of assets and liabilities. It was easier than feeling. He gestured vaguely at the breathtaking view. I built all of this to forget her. When my team brought me the Sullivan Street block for redevelopment, I signed the papers without a second thought. I didn't even register the name of the cafe until you stood in front of me that morning, talking about a place with a soul, and it was like a physical blow. He leaned forward, his gaze intense and filled with a raw, painful honesty. When I laughed at you in that restaurant, he confessed, his voice heavy with a shame that felt years old. I wasn't just laughing at a waitress's foolish dream. I was laughing at Eleanor's. I was laughing at the man I used to be. The man who believed in things like that. You stood there so full of passion for your grandmother's legacy, and you held up a mirror. I hated the man I saw reflected in it. He took a deep breath, a shaky, shuddering sound. Then he pushed another much heavier document across the table. It was thick and official, bound in a simple blue cover. On the top, in stark, unambiguous letters, were the words, "Deed of Title." Nina stared at it, her mind refusing to comprehend. She looked at him, then back at the document. Her heart was a wild drum against her ribs. "The test was never for you, Miss Petrov," he said, his voice now gentle. "It was for me. I had to know if your dream was real, if it was pure, if it was worthy of carrying on the spirit of that place, a spirit I had abandoned. You didn't just pass. You reminded me of who I was supposed to be." He slid the document closer to her. "The property is yours. The deed has been transferred into your name. It is free and clear of all liens and debt. My company will fund the complete renovation as detailed in the proposal. Consider it an investment, and a long overdue apology to my wife." Tears she hadn't realized were welling finally spilled over hot and silent tracking paths down her cheeks. She couldn't form words. Her hand, trembling, reached out and touched the cover of the deed. It was real. The paper was real. She slowly opened it and saw her name printed in official, irrefutable, black ink, Nina Petrov. Owner. The weight of the word, the reality of it, settled over her, and a choked sob escaped her lips. It was the sound of a lifetime of struggle, a week of impossible pressure, and a sudden miraculous deliverance. He waited patiently for her to compose herself. When she finally looked up, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, he was watching her with a quiet understanding. "There is one condition," he said, a faint trace of his old commanding tone returning. Nina's heart leaped into her throat. Of course, there was always a catch. "I want to be your first customer," Finian Doyle said. And for the very first time, he smiled. It was not the cruel smirk from the restaurant or the calculating expression of a businessman. It was a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes, erasing the storm and leaving behind a clear, quiet sky. "And I will expect a complimentary slice of that chocolate babka." A watery laugh bubbled up from Nina's chest. She nodded, unable to speak, and extended her hand across the table. He took it, his grip firm and warm. It wasn't a deal being closed. It was a promise being made. 3 months later, the street lights of Sullivan Street fought for prominence against the warm, golden glow pouring from the windows of Anya's Spoon. The reopening was more than an event. It was a festival. The entire block was filled with the scent of cinnamon dark roast coffee and melting chocolate. Inside the cafe was alive. The sound of an espresso machine hissing the clink of ceramic on saucer, and the happy, vibrant hum of 100 conversations filled the air. Mr. Henderson, looking a decade younger in a crisp new shirt, was holding court by the door, regaling neighbors with stories. The food blogger, was in a corner capturing the scene for her followers, and in a quiet booth, booth 7, Nina had made sure of it, sat Finian Doyle. He wasn't looking at his phone or reading a report. He was just watching the room, a small, peaceful smile on his face as he nursed a black coffee. Nina, her cheeks flushed with heat from the ovens, and happiness moved through her cafe. Her cafe. She wore a simple white apron over her dress, her grandmother's leather-bound book sitting proudly on the counter behind her. She caught Finian's eye from across the room. He raised his cup to her in a silent, respectful toast. She smiled back, a deep, bone-weary, but utterly blissful smile. The echo of a billionaire's cruel laughter had set her on this impossible journey. It had been the sound of humiliation, of dismissal, of every door ever slammed in her face. But tonight, in the warm and noisy heart of her own dream, it was gone, replaced by the beautiful, life-affirming sound of her community, her home, her legacy, finally brought to life. Nina's story reminds us that the biggest dreams are often born from the quietest corners of our hearts. It shows that resilience isn't about never getting knocked down. It's about what you bake in the kitchen while you're getting back up. A single voice armed with passion and a purpose rooted in love can be powerful enough to move mountains, or in this case, a billionaire's conscience. It proves that wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the community you build and the legacies you honor. What did you think of Nina's incredible journey? Do you believe one person can truly make a difference against impossible odds? Let us know in the comments below. If this story inspired you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs a dose of hope, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible real-life stories. Your support helps us keep sharing them.